Good morning.
Oh, just emailing you, sending the reply to your letter. So yeah, I'll do that in a second. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm just reading a text message from my baby brother who's been disconnected from our family for a long time and he's become a healer, a religious healer.
Oh wow, okay, that's truly something.
Yeah, goodness. Okay. I mean, literally, it's been years since he's contacted us.
Family
Anyway,
is
very
weird.
strange. Yeah. Yeah, it's been very interesting. That's a time over drinks. All
Yeah,
right, so listen, did you have any changes to the to the graduate students travel?
only my email address.
All right, you want the Frode Hegland. Okay, I'll change that.
That's it.
All right, let me get that right now. Copy.
And I'm going to be asking the students today who really are students, and if some of them are recent graduates, should we accept that? And if so, for how long, as in what period of recent graduateness would we give them? I don't know if
Hmm.
we even do that.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. Let me get this changed real fast so I won't forget to do this. Hang on a second. Normally you wouldn't do that at all. Let's see if we have enough interest from those that are graduate students. And graduate students, generally at least at my university, it could be different in Europe, who knows? But at my university, you're a graduate student from the minute you're accepted into a graduate program, yeah, until you get your degree, like you get graduate the actual event.
Yeah.
You were Andrew, you're here. I thought you were going to be late.
Yeah, I saw that
I
message pop up. It's like, that's fine, but here you are.
yeah,
Hello.
I thought I was going to be late too, but my commitment ended early, so here I am.
Okay, let me get this
Very good.
changed here.
So,
Okay.
Dene, thank you for backing me up last week when Mark and I had our disagreement. I'm so glad you talked about you and John because the whole point of having a community is that people are different. So I'm very happy to go forward with very different ways of looking at it. I've been dealing with some interface stuff all morning, which is my way of dealing with the structure of what we're doing. So yeah, that was nice.
Did I do that? I don't remember doing that.
I
What did
did.
I
No,
do?
because
What did I do?
I mean, in real life, and I know this is recorded in public and everything, so, to make sure, I would say the same in front of Mark. Hopefully he'll be here and I will. There are very different ways to develop something from the data side, from the
Oh
interface
yeah.
side, blah, blah, blah. And these things are complementary, and it's great when we have a bit of a give and take, push and pull to shape it. So, yeah, thanks for that.
I just wish we had a better process for communicating the push and pull. Hey Chris, how are
Yes.
you? We,
Chris,
we've got gotta
j- j-
we got to improve upon our process.
yes. No, no, continuous improvement, absolutely. Chris, just for context, because you look young, are you still a student or is that in the past or what? I just don't know. I can't tell with this Zoom video.
No, it's distant past. I'm 44. So.
Okay, so you graduated last year. Okay, fair enough.
So
It's
Frodo,
good.
I'm going to go ahead and resend this document to you. Would you put it on the website for us? And that'll make it easy, make it a downloadable. Should I make it a PDF?
No, because then it becomes a form, and then people have to open it, Acrobat to fill in the things. Just a Word document, I think, is just totally cool.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and send this to you then.
I'll put it on Dropbox and link to it.
Okay, okay.
Hello, Mark. We were just talking about you and how useful it is to have the different ways of looking at development, like we talked about last week, from the data side, from the interface side, and I am so exceptionally grateful to this community that we have such different perspectives, because otherwise we're just turning the same thing. Okay, Karl, hello. Question: You've graduated, right?
I have my master's degree that I finished 3 years ago. Went to work for the Army Corps for 3 years. Decided I was not moving fast enough or in the right direction. So I went back to school and I am currently working on my PhD. I should be finished with my coursework at the end of this semester in December, and I am optimistically hoping to do my data collection, my proposal, and my defense by the end of next calendar year.
Oh, cool.
Where are you doing your PhD?
Mississippi State University.
Oh, great. Good.
So he's a student. Good. Oh, Leon is here. That's a treat. That's been a while. He's been exceptionally busy, and then we see coolness on the Twitter. I love the fact that his name is long enough to have an ellipsis. Hello, Leon. Long time no see.
Hello, good to see you.
Well,
Good to
not
see
no
everybody.
long time no see. You've been here recently, but you've been a bit quiet because of the things. Anyway, very glad you're here. Right. Obviously, it's an open agenda today. I expect Fabien will be here. Haven't heard otherwise. But to kick things off, just want to talk about the specific interface thing that goes back to what we talked about last week. Now, this is ridiculously simple, but for me, it was a big deal. So actually, you know what? I have to give a minute's worth of context first. A design problem that I have with some kind of a knowledge environment. Oh, here's Fabien. Okay, I'll wait, Fabien. Who's the birthday? The wife? Mark? Oh, happy birthday. Okay, hello, Fabien.
Hello, hello, everyone.
Hello, hello. So today, Open Monday, so we'll talk about all kinds of things, but just wanted to kind of round off a little bit from last week's discussion. There's an element that I think is really important. The top one is our own book. If we're going to produce that as kind of a knowledge structure, how do we separate an article from the book? We talked about that in different environments. But to do that in XR, we need to keep revisiting the idea of what's inside a volume, how the volumes talk to each other, and all that stuff. But there's a simpler thing. I had a hell of a time dealing with this, and that is interaction-wise, visually, superficially, how do we represent the difference between a link, an acknowledged space, graph, or whatever, and a thing that has stuff inside it? Because once you have a lot of things on the screen, and the example I keep using is actually you guys. So I have all these lab people, and that is entirely useful, but is also entirely useless most of the time. So where do I put you? No, Karl, not really in this sense. This is not as sophisticated as that. So let's say we have a list of all these people. If I now want to not have it so prominent, I can crunch it. Yes, Mark.
So, sort of in this sounds like whether they're nested or not, but you collapse or not. So you have something that's linked to a lot of other things.
No.
You essentially collapse it, for want of a better term, into one object, and you are asking how you give tellback to the user of the environment that this object basically is a collapsed object. Essentially there's more inside it, however you want to interpret inside. In other words, there's more. Because
okay, let me explain.
There's a difference between, sorry, just quickly to finish out. There's a difference also between, obviously, that you have an object that, say, has effectively, a textual article in it, has metadata about itself. But the distinction I'm making is you're saying this object essentially links to a number of things that are not drawn here, that essentially for which this object now stands proxy. In other words, that's why I use the terms collapse, because effectively this blob shape whatever thing on the screen represents a whole host of things. Is that a fair summary?
Kind of, but the thing is, there's a few specific issues. So I have a list. Each one is an entity. So I could have you in a column. I could have you all over the place, whatever. Each one of you may have a definition, but you certainly have a tag or categorization as being a person. Here's Rob just. Hi, Rob.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, morning. So just really briefly, we're talking about a small interface issue, which I think is a bit indicative of larger things. And that is, I have a list of a lot of people, you guys. And it's on, whether it's 2D or XR, for the sake of argument, doesn't matter, right? So now I decide it's useful, but I don't want it there all the time. So I have a few options. I can crunch it into lots of text names just being visually piled on top of each other like you can on a desktop. Or I can choose to fold it into something. Now, if I fold it into something so that they all disappear, but there's something left on the screen, that's the kind of interesting design issue that I've been thinking about. Visually, for the design, I've just decided to put a box around the thing. But here's the question. When you fold it, it has to be folded into a new representation. So the question I've been dealing with, and I'm going to show you two screenshots in a section, is when you do the act of folding, do you then have to type in or speak the name of this package, this folder, this collection? That might be a bit breaking the flow. So the thing that I'm looking at now is you assign something to be a folder. I can't think of a better word than folder. I know it sounds very 2D and boring, but because of the act of folding, right? So you assign something to be a folder, and now I'll show you, because I'm really wondering if this paradigm works or if I'm going mad. So then you select something on the screen and you get something like a context menu, and you have fold into. Fold into will have a menu showing the folders. Of course, you can do it in other ways, drag and drop and all of that. But the point of it is, it now becomes, all the things that were folding into it becomes just that thing, right? And if it's empty, it could be grayed out. Now, that may not sound revolutionary, but the reason I want to run it by you guys is it effectively becomes an on and off switch for visibility. So if you now tap on this folder again, it will show all those items in their original location. So instead of putting something into something, we have little, essentially on-off buttons. So if I now touch FTL Lab people, boom, they all appear. Touch it again, boom, they disappear. But they don't actually move. They don't go into the folder. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the hide and reveal. Mark, please.
Well, there's also the fact that, of course, the people in there may be part of other groups as well. So,
Yeah.
so unless it is a fixed tree where somebody, if they are part of the FTL group, can't be part of something else, there's that to consider as well. Because if someone is part of an unfolded group and a folded group, what happens when you fold? Well, when you fold one of the groups, what happens to the person who is still part of the unfolded group?
This would be an action. So if you are part of two different groups and I do a hide, you would be hidden, because I've said whatever's connected to this will now be hidden.
Okay, but that doesn't work for the other group then. So
then you will be hidden. You will then be hidden from the other group. I agree that this is an important issue.
Okay, there's the point about that seems a bit unintentionally ad hoc in that. So what's happening is parts of a group are being hidden simply by the dint of the first group that if someone's involved in multiple groups, the first group wins out, and that seems an odd design pattern from a sort of information perspective. The reason I asked the question was not to create a deliberate edge case, was just trying to get a hold of really what's being hidden, because so this is essentially an ad hoc grouping. I think the way to do this is to do something you dislike, but is to actually think about the information. Don't think about how it looks from it. Think about what things belong to, because what you're seeing, what you're presenting on the screen, is based on the information those objects are and the relationships they have, are either explicit or inferred to other things in the environment. And until you've actually decided the edges to those things, per the sort of edge case I've just given you, you could go around the houses on trying to work out what to call things or do things, because you'd find that you make it and then you trip over something else. And the danger is that essentially you start out, you say, oh, well, I'll do what happened in the first case, but you back yourself into a corner. Not intentionally, but this is what generally happens in this circumstance.
The way this is designed now for testing is that you can assign an entity to be part of one folder. Remember, a folder is not a view, it's not a list. It's a thing it goes into. So it wouldn't be multiple from this way. But anyway, Rob.
God. I'm reading a book about semiotics, and he's talking about the complexity of the interactions between icons, indexes, symbols, and signs, and the multiplicity of the ways in which they interact with each other. And what do you mean by, what is the folder that you're putting things in? Is that an index that points to a group of people, or is it a sign that suggests there's some kind of meaning that connects it with people? Or choose your poison.
Well, I mean, these are exactly the questions we need to ask here. And I think, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, was how we move stuff around becomes really difficult and more important. So if we just pause this thing for a minute, imagine we're in a Peter Wasilko memory palace, like we talked about, right? So that is not one thing. That is a collection of sculptures or volumes, right? It would make sense as just having one. So when you then come to share that with someone, that's something we need to keep discussing. But you take a specific thing from that into a shared environment. That's interesting. But how do you then, what is the kind of hierarchy there? Because we want to do this with our book. Right, so our book is a collection of articles that also has information about itself, same as the proceedings, exactly the same as Andrew's been working on. So how do you then take an article or paper, whatever we choose to call it, out of one thing into another thing? Right, this is getting really, really important. And do you move it or do you copy it? In other words, is it now duplicated? And if you duplicate it, is there still a canonical original? Or are we all dealing with copies of it? You know, it sounds a bit spinning, but whenever I try to do the interface things, I do get into these information design issues that Mark is talking about. They do connect. It's like I move this thing here, but what is that thing? Yeah, Mark.
My observation, I mean, I start with saying that this really is not my core area of expertise, but my observation is that there isn't a single solution that actually deals with this. You basically have to make some decisions. There may not be ones you want to make, but you have to in terms of this, because you hit all sorts of things. You know, some things may need to be in two groups, and you see various ways in which people use aliases, or things like Don't Think Pro uses things like replicants. There are all sorts of ways you can shade this, but what it generally points to is the fact that you can't have a one size fits all. So, for instance, in terms of things like canonical copy, well, if in a federated system, you could pass everything around so everyone essentially holds of the canonical copy, but I suspect that scales badly. Or else the canonical copy, whatever that needs to be, might be held by essentially a holder in their space. I'm again leaving that reasonably undefined at the moment, but the point being, when they pass it to you, they could choose, they could choose to pass you a copy. The parallel part of it is, in terms of whether it's a copy or the original, is what you want to do with it. If you just want to show it in your environment, that's fine, because you essentially are not seeking to change the original structure of the document. So you can work with a copy because essentially you can throw it away when you're done and no harm is done. If, however, you want information changes that you make in your environment to go back to the other environment, then yes, you do have to have some sort of a breadcrumb trail back to wherever the canonical thing fits, unless you've decided it will be a federated object where anyone can alter, everyone holds the canonical copy and any edit becomes an edit to the canonical copy. But I don't think, I'm not aware that there is a sort of an Uber pattern here. Unfortunately, it's a matter of making a choice as to how you want changes to occur.
Yeah, I'm hoping that particularly Leon and Fabien, being networked people, will have strong opinions on this, but I do think the number one important thing has to be build a shape of stuff and share it. Well, if you sometimes, because I also agree, Mark, there's not one way of doing it. So sometimes you want to share a live object where changes are updated. Other times you just want to say, here's my book, here's my Christmas tree. It's cut off from everything else, but at least you can open it, so to speak.
I mean, there are several aspects to this as well. It is that there's a sort of what's visible or not. So there may be things in the environment you can't see, but they're there, and that's fine. The fact that you can't see them is a positive decision that you've made in the environment. You'll hide these things and not others, but they're there. There is, but there's also, when you're bringing something in, there's a decision possibly to make between whether you position them where they were, where they came from, or whether you add them to your environment in a relative position to your current point of view or whatever anchor you have. In other words, you rather than take some things and just plot them in the XYZ coordinates you have, what you might want to do, and we nibbled at this the other day, you might actually want the option of being able to present them relative to a point of reference. Because that actually might make more sense in terms of merging them into your environment. Because one of the things you don't want to do is have all the things and everything clustered in one corner of your environment and a big empty space around. Because one of the things you're trying to do normally in this sort of space is you want to be able to see things and have some sense they're interrelation. So again, that's something to consider when you're bringing something or certainly something. As faceted, say, as somebody else's memory palace. So you've got some things with an intentional relationship to them. You want to import that object into yours. You probably want them to retain their relative structure to one another, but you might not necessarily want them in the coordinates of their source environment, because that might be putting them right on top of something that you have. So instead of in front of you there, you might want them over there. So in that case, you're maintaining their relative position to one another, but you're moving their actual location within the overall environment.
Yes. So we all talked about use cases last week, and the use case that I settled on is authoring our book. So that makes interesting things from individual article perspectives, but also from how the articles hang together. But when it comes to having this kind of a knowledge object, Fabien, you've been thinking a lot about this, and that's how I put you on the spot.
Well, thank you. Never can't escape. Yeah, there were a couple of things also on the chat about semiotics and mereology. So what's a part, what's the object? I think one of the questions here, from what I understood, is what's atomic, what we cannot go below, what's the most primitive, not necessarily object, but reference even to it. And I think it does indeed, a bit like Mark was saying, it depends on the usage, so that if you are going to have a copy that you're going to, or if you are going to have a thing and you want to modify it, you probably want a copy of it at least, because you might not even have the right to the original thing if it's, let's say, on a remote server. So there is an aspect to it that depends on the usage. And some of those questions, in my opinion, are not related to the representation of it, like how it's being visualized. But I don't know what's fundamentally different in XR versus in command line or on the desktop with a 2D metaphor. My gut feeling, it's those are the same things. It doesn't mean, again, that like what they are the same. The way they are then visualized and manipulated might not be, and they're probably not in terms of like efficiently doing it. But I think at the core of it, my again, without mostly thinking too hard, my gut feeling is like file system and representation of what has been done before. So I would tend to rely on, let's say, a directory or and push those what's been done. So what's a file system? What's an alias in a file system? Like a hard link for it versus a soft one. Like a lot of those, I think, are technically they remain correct even in XR. What do they look like? What they should look like? I think it's still up for discussion or up for implementation. But so far, I'm not sure what are the fundamental differences with the old way, let's say Linux or Unix from the 70s or even older than this.
I think that's fair enough, and I'm wondering if we at least partly look at our book as a case study, and then we have right, Rob, yes, no. You can do that, but it should be possible to do that, to do marbles and bags and stuff. I asked, obviously, Claude, and one of the suggestions was bubbles. Claude actually had some really interesting insights. It was a bit shocking. I used the prompts, considering what you know about my work, what might be non-obvious that I haven't thought about, and came up with some ideas. Anyway, what I put in the chat is a document with links to live, right? So if you publish a book, as we're doing, you want that to have what some people call, oh, I don't know, I can't remember the right term, but it is important that the world knows it was published at a specific time. Let's say there's an invention in there or something somebody else can quote. That is important. So a book should not be a completely changeable object once published. When you're authoring it, fine, and also the view should be flexible. We all agree on that. Well, what we do is for the book series, Karl, we call it a volume 5, but that's because V5 looks cool. You know, there's no strong logic behind it. But what I'm wondering about is if we think about it in terms of we all submit an article, but in that article, we should be able to make references to live things, right? So the user author has to do that. An example would be the weather. Like, you know, it's really insert current weather here today. It's, you know, almost a joke, but that kind of logic where we explicitly say go and take things, because it is important that that published thing is, you know, we want to put it on all kinds of websites to make sure that no one in the future thinks that we didn't do it on that day, right? So if we have a logic around, we expect because another thing, in terms of our language, a manuscript, at least in my language, is a changeable document. A published document is not changeable in terms of content, not view, right? So we're talking about authoring something to make it public. So on the authoring side, we can do all kinds of cool things. But once you decide to make it public, people can't change it. You can't change it after the fact. You shouldn't be able to, unless you have a new version or you have an update, right? Which is absolutely legitimate. And this is, and I see your face, Karl, and I agree that these are important issues. I mean, if we go all the way back to Doug Engelbart's journal, it was impossible to edit something once it was in, but you could always add a new copy of it, which then becomes a version higher. Very basic, very strong versioning system. But of course, he owned the whole world, so you had link databases, backlinks, you had all those kind of goodies that we don't really have today. But I do think we need to think quite soon about something along the lines of copying as citation that we have, which is basically copy text plus the BibTeX equivalent, right? Because if we can build a basic thing of a Lego block or atomic or whatever it is for that, then we can start experimenting, right? I know that that was a bit disjointed, but
Just quickly, how does that relate to the opening point about sort of showing what more there is in an object? So we have a book, we have the notion of a book, we have an information object that is a book that consists of in the nature, in the way that a future textbook is essentially it's a bit like, it's essentially like a compendium in print terms, because it's a collection standard, it's an edited collection of standardized essays, edited in the sense that you as the editor have selected what's in there. The authors effectively are the authors of their own works within it. So this is a sort of known thing in print terms. The information objects within it can certainly hold the metadata to make themselves citable. I would suggest probably going forward, you don't use actually BibTeX. You might as well store it in a plain text form, something like JSON that actually says what it is, and then people can parse that into BibTeX in whatever way they do with BibTeX, because BibTeX isn't a standard as such. And various enclaves have quite different hard-edged versions of what they think BibTeX is. Whereas if you
the
just
sharing format we're talking about is definitely JSON, Mark, yes.
Yeah, but again, I mean, in a year's time, it might not be JSON, it might be something else, but essentially use a plain text representation that just has something that has a field that says, this is what this thing is, so this is the title, and then the value of the title. And then you can...
Okay, so you asked the question at the beginning of that.
Yeah.
How these different things relate. On one level, they don't relate at all, because they're views, right? So it turned out that the notion of having a folder is, in this inception, on this system, with this way of thinking, is essentially an on-off switch for a group of entities. That's it. Hide, reveal, hide, reveal. That was an interesting thing. But there is a related issue. So I've written this thing for you guys, and I haven't shared it yet, because export is a bit messed up at the moment. Plus, why would you want to read more, right? And here is a really interesting design issue that's related to it, not on a map, but as text. So I define entities here. Right, so this block of text is just saying what an entity is, which is great once it's done. But once you've read that, you may be interested in working with the more quote unquote interesting parts of the document, because it's got more meat on it. So I think it would be really useful if we find a way, even in a normal relative text stream, to hide things. And I don't just mean, putting them in a glossary, or maybe I do. The problem with the glossary is when you're reading it, it's a bit chunked up. So the hiding and revealing issue, I think, comes on almost every level of how we interact with our text, not just in a map.
Just quickly, you said that the glossary was chunked up, but surely that's just the way it's presented. I mean, in a sense that if you had a different UI to that little panel you opened, so in other words, that's sort of
I realized that as I was talking,
Mark.
You're absolutely right. I realized that as I was saying it.
The other thing is essentially that if you take a sort of, I guess, a sort of data/information approach, if your glossary has effectively a unique ID within the environment you're using, or a global ID, then if you want to do something with it, you just tell the environment to give you that information from that ID in whatever way you want to dress it up. Where it becomes challenging is, I think it does change. It's unsettling if you're used to writing in a certain way, and this goes back to the conversation I think last week about, well, what does authoring mean, or what is it becoming? Because if you want to write for this sort of environment, to pull it apart in the ways that you do, then you probably don't want to approach it as a linear form of writing, which is what the one thing we're all pretty much heavily trained in. And it's not a wrong or right. It's just that there's a human factors problem as well. Is, so how do you help ease yourself from the one perspective to the other without sort of bending all your existing experience out of shape? and also at the same time, importantly, not turning it into a kind of a better or worse thing, because that's not the point at all. Because if you're just going to write a story to be in a storybook on paper, you don't need to worry about this stuff. If you're writing a very complicated set of procedural instructions for something that's got to run across systems, yeah, it probably does matter more than the original linear document. So there's a yin and yang to this. You've got to balance them out. And it's difficult because some of the things you're asking for, the tools just don't exist at the moment.
Yeah.
And if they're anyway, they're in sort of 2D knowledge tools at the moment.
Yeah. So, Leon, I see your hand, but just two things briefly. So, what do you feel generally, people, about writing in a lot of what we write in glossary-sized units? So, define stuff, have it in a place, may not be part of the main text. Is that something that this community finds interesting or not?
I've always found it helpful when working with academic papers or with incredibly long documents in the several hundred pages, that when I'm using the digital text of that either the table of contents or the glossary has in-text links, so I can click on the entry for the chapter or whatever it is, and it just puts me directly on that page. So I like that idea of using either the glossary and or the table of contents as the sort of hub to get to everything else.
Yeah, because I can imagine Fabien, for instance, he has this spatial scaffolding, and it needs a bit of an introduction every time he writes about it. So it would be very worthwhile to have that as a ready-to-go thing. So glossary management then becomes an interesting thing. Karl, before I hand over to Leon here, I see your question about the rough draft, how to share it. It's either Slack or Twitter, really. And the mailing list is basically emailing a lot of people. And don't forget, Monday week is when the articles are due. So if you need some more time, I'm sure we can do that, but Monday week, yes. It's scary. Right, Leon.
Yeah, just a quick question. Could this folding be automated? Like, of course, I can see the use case for folding something manually, that an editor chooses to fold something, but could potentially a glossary be used as somehow to fold? Maybe a slider where you basically go from sort of large to small, detailed sub-chapters, etc. Like, is this supposed to be used for manual? Like, should it be really manual, or could it be driven by some kind of glossary or index which already exists in the document?
So this is a fantastically good time to be asking this question because, first of all, I don't know. But we've gone through this so many times, but now there's a different thing. You can see my screen, right? So this marking thing that we have now in Author, which is really to help me, the writer of this, to be able to skim what that section is about. When I fold it, that text is there, so I have the headings plus that. So what I think you're kind of alluding to is that maybe when we're at a quote-unquote normal reading level, the glossary definition should not be shown. But if we do another level of expansion, then glossary definitions will, this is stretch text, and this is not a unique invention, but I'm just wondering in the context of our conversation, that if I now zoom another level, glossary definitions are in situ expanded. Of course, we can't do this with PDF, which is why I haven't experimented with it, but we're going slightly beyond that now, aren't we? Where is the Slack? Please email me asking to be invited. Sorry that you haven't been. If anyone else is missing, Chris, I think you're also not on it, actually. Well, actually, no, that's not useful because that's actually for the Sloan delivery. So that's not that useful. Why don't you just join our Twitter group? Just DM me and I'll add you, or Fabien. Who's the admin of our little group?
I don't know if you have an admin, but yeah, if you put your X handle or Twitter handle in the chat, then I'll try to add you right now.
Thank you. So, yeah, so the question then is, Leon is here, right? It's just video off, I'm hoping, right? I mean, the reason for the defined concepts in author was originally so that I could write the sentence. I went to the university today to talk to my supervisor. My project is coming along slowly, and almost every single word would have a glossary term. University, click on it. In this case, we're talking about the University of Southampton. Supervisor, Professor David Millard, blah, 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 etc. So that someone who has a clue about what I'm doing don't need to go through those. Because one of the things I absolutely hate, and I'm using the word hate correctly, is news articles that start with introductions that are obvious. You know, that filler text to make it human. You know, if you're reading it, very often you read a news piece because you know about the subject. Give me the meat. What is new? What is happening? But sometimes you do need that filler. And we've talked many, many times in the community about this kind of stretching of, you know, writing for a novice, writing for an expert in the field. Maybe we're getting closer to do it now that we're talking about writing in XR and writing with glossaries. As a sci-fi writer, Rob, the notion of writing local definitions, which is what I consider glossaries to be, is that, and if you write for a digital reading environment, is that something that intrigues you or annoys you as a professional, fantastic author?
I'm working on a project, and a lot of people have told me that I need to have a dramatis personae list of characters because many of them are aliens and or otherworldly. So I think that's important. It also contains an invented language, so I probably will need a glossary for that. It keeps getting bigger as I add more words.
That's
So
very
yeah,
interesting.
it is important.
So in our previous books, what I've done is define the authors as glossary terms. So when you come across an author's name, you can do a find operation and you get their bio. Because we can't really expect the authors to make glossary terms. You know, that's a bit of an ask. But how would we, considering, okay, so not all of you use author for some bizarre unknown reason, but I can do it for you. So if you want to write in your own style, in your own environment, but you want to write using that, keeping that in mind, then we can start looking at how to make that more interesting in an environment, right?
One other thought that sort of links back into this is, as you were talking about, you know, basically what you could show or shouldn't. My mind flew back to Microcosm, which is what, late 80s, which was Sir Wendy Hall and Co.'s project at Southampton. And that, like many things, it started out with a particular purpose, which was to take a large bequest that the university had been given and to make it accessible to a wider audience. A wider audience in those days probably would have been people coming to the library simply because this is a pre-web. But one of the interesting things it had was a link-based stack. So the link base is sort of the more pure hypertext form of than the web, in the sense that the links live outside the documents, and the documents are basically told where the links exist and lay them over the text. One of the things that Microcosm allowed you to do was effectively vary the link base stack dynamically. So if you altered the stack, the links you got given might vary. Or you might have teachers' links and students' links and all sorts of funky stuff like that. Where the link point to what we were discussing earlier is this fact of how much you show. So you I could see that in an analogous sort of way, you might put a setting where you might want to see all the glossaries or fewer glossaries or glossaries down to a certain depth. The two difficulties I think that arise with that, one's on the authoring end and one's on the consumer end. The consumer end is that actually probably turns out that you don't want to see the same level of decomposition in terms of glossaries across the piece. You want more in some areas and less in others. So that becomes a bit of a sort of signaling problem as to how you set that up. Now, if you're doing it for a document you'll reconsume, that's fine, because normally you'll set it, and then when you go back to that place again, you probably won't need to change it, or you might tweak it for that one document you're there. But when you first meet it, you might have to use a global level and go from there. From the author's perspective, it's just the amount of work just spirals away into an absolutely massive amount. It's difficult for one person to do. And if you have a team, it's difficult in another way, because someone has to be doing the consistency across the piece. And it's not that these aren't issues that are dealt with in all sorts of areas at the moment. But again, there isn't I don't think there's a particularly simple model that makes that any easier for us.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So, Brandel, we're talking about knowledge representation, kind of starting with a map graph type thing, looked at ways of hiding and showing things, and now we're using the use case of our own book for next year. And one of the key things we've been talking about is the notion of glossaries, which in this context is purely a definition that is associated with an article or a volume. And I really love the word volume, Rob, since you pointed out last week that a volume is a space. You know, we think of it as a book, but of course it's a space too, so that's nice. What we have done before, Brandel, is all the contributing authors to the book have been defined as glossary terms for views. So now we're looking at ways to go a bit further with that and how we can spatialize our own book. Because when we go into different scenarios, it goes a little wishy-washy. There's one thing we're all working on. We're all writing some kind of a piece for the book. So even though we won't be XR showing it probably this year, it's a useful scenario. By the way, if you have any cool places we should see in California, that would be cool. Fabien is not sure if he has time, I understand, to go California. I might have to go straight to Washington, but we'll see what happens. Emily got me some flights today. I have to look it after this call, so I'll share that around. Mark has already booked his flights. Bay Area, a phrase I used to hate when I lived there, but it actually works because there's a bay in the middle of it. And congratulations on your 10 years, Brandel.
Thank you.
That was
Yeah,
pretty cool. Just to step back a bit for using Brandel as an excuse, what we're talking about here is actually the logic of the Vision OS, where if we want to build something like a Peter Vasilko memory palace, you wouldn't have it as one single thing. You would have different volumes around your physical space. So if we look at our book as being one volume, the question then is, how do we deal with the fact that it has articles? So logically, in our XR work, how do you take things out? And that's why I mentioned earlier, the way you can copy and paste a citation now as BibTeX is probably an important approach. Not using the formatting we have now. It's totally cool to use JSON, which is probably more suited. But we really need to, I think, start experimenting with shunting bits of knowledge around, because we're talking about stuff the community has talked about for decades and decades, and nothing has really worked. And now we have this incredible opportunity with headsets as purely an excuse, because most of this is the same in 2D, right? I mean, of course, there will be growing more and more into XR, but I think we can do it. So I really want to hear any fighting words on, no, we should do it this way, and then we can punch a little bit and see what comes out. Some strong opinions. How can I receive from Fabien a bit of knowledge, let's say it's a paragraph of text, let's not make it any more sophisticated, that he has taken from his space, done a copy action, and then he shares it with me through whatever means, and I have my knowledgey thing here, and I want to put it over there.
So I know it's a provocation, but you already can, and I already gave you a link for this, and I feel that I'm saying this on a weekly basis since I've done that. So I'll put the link again in the chat. It is a JSON that can be also opened by Zotero, which is a bibliographic management tool, and it includes the XYZ coordinates. So please do open it wherever you want. And then you're going to find a bunch of flows and limits. And I will happily say, oh yeah, you're right, that doesn't handle this use case or that use case or whatnot. And I can build on it. But there is a way today, and there's been a way for a couple of months now, to do exactly that. And the whole point of this is to say, yes, it is indeed flow and limited, but it is possible. So I'll put the link back, and I'll very happily, again, whatever feedback there is, work on it generally and do be able to exchange, even if it's initially maybe a forced process, let's say reference for version 5 of the book or something else, but it is a way.
Yes, no, Fabien, absolutely. And because you've been saying it week after week, I, of course, as you know, I've implemented it. So the thing that I just sent there is the current layout in Author onto Canvas, JSON, whatever. So it is definitely a start, but there's also the question of how do we, maybe it's an interface question. How do I take a piece of something in my environment, copy it and give it to you?
So that's indeed, sorry, but I jump on this because it is indeed a different question, which is like, what is the UX or even the UI for it? How do we manipulate that piece of knowledge? And it's not the same as where is it located, what format is it used for, etc. And that's indeed a different question. And for this, I would tend to think that I'll let everybody join in.
So I'll ask you to disambiguate your question there, Frode. When you say you want him to copy something or copy a piece of something and send it to you, is he sending you a reference or a resource? Is he sending you something that is editable or just viewable?
Okay, this is just my take, and I'm grateful for the question. If you disagree, that's brilliant. What I'm talking about is, if this was the movie Fantasia, it would be a thing to a thing, right? I am thinking about it being self-contained, but like we talked about a bit earlier, it could potentially have a link back to a canonical source or an updating resource, but that would be a thing inside, right? So let's say the item he's giving me is London, and it happens to have a link inside it to Wikipedia data about London. So I can choose in the future to use it as I found it, or for it to be updated with new data. So I think that should be the kind of notion. But it's kind of exciting because we have right now a copy a citation and paste it that works because of the whole BibTeX thing, right? It's brilliant. And by the way, Brandel, thank you very much. Apple, as a company that you represent, is now featuring Apple on the macOS App Store Author as apps we love right now, right underneath the operating system. So my downloads are a little bit bigger than before. Yeah, so considering the copy a citation, why can't we also do a copy a glossary term or whatever we call it, an entity or a thing? If we have a little bit of a language for that, imagine how cool it would be to be able to even email each other in its plain text in JSON format or whatever. You drag it into your space and it's there as a knowledge unit. That would be amazing, right?
So it sounds like you're describing, he's not sending you bare text. He's not sending you a file. He's sending you something that can be opened like a file, but it has some level of optional user initiated functionality, like updating the stuff within it, like you mentioned. So you will have to have some sort of interpreter for that functionality on your terminal or wherever you're pulling it into in order to access that. So whether it's an importer or an exporter or just a compiler, an interpreter, what's the IDE, something like that. So you're looking for you want to send something that is easily transferable and openable as a text file that can be opened on any device and anything. But then for each device or operating system or whatever, you'll need a specific importer or interpreter for that thing in order for it to do the extra stuff other than just be readable text.
Yes. So what I did now, I opened a document that I exported. Then I copied a citation using BibTeX because there's an option for that, and I just pasted it in. So it's an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Let me just try something different. So if I now paste this, yeah, no, it's the same. But it could also, obviously it could have other fields, but it just seems that, I know it's very, very boring in a sense, but text itself being liberated to be read and not only to be kind of obscured as code when it is obscured, not that code is obscured itself, can be very powerful. So couldn't we use the same kind of logic as this to exchange other types of knowledge in addition to citations, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, when you were saying London, I was thinking about all of the artifacts that are London and what somebody might mean by them. Passing somebody the URL to the Wikipedia article of London isn't super useful. One, because it is so multifaceted in terms of a resource about all of the things that are in it, and two, because the sort of search and discovery for that URL itself is relatively low effort. So as a token, it doesn't represent very much. And in contrast, one if I've said it before, but one if by land, two if by sea is a very simple piece of information, but the particular context of it is not. It's like just look up the Wikipedia article on how they're going to invade. Like so, there are sort of extremes with regard to the specificity of the information in terms of how personal or private it is versus the level of resolution of that information. How much data there is in it. There are dozens of bits in the London article in an information sense, possibly even more. And so um, it depends on what it's expected to do in your deliberative process to accommodate this information. And that sounds like waffle, but it's just like what in your space are you going to be able to expect to do with it? And I think we need to have opinions about that in order to do more than just sort of talk about a JSON or talk about a visual representation within your deliberative space. And so, the volume, this idea of volumes is interesting because a volume has an enclosing boundary as well, and something that we've talked about in a hypertext environment is being able to delineate a closure around a boundary, and that itself being a meaningful act. Whether you're sort of inventing or discovering information and where you draw that line of what it is that you mean with something. So I think the data that you pass around is relevant, obviously, but what you expect to be able to do with it and what kind of deliberative space is the sort of the more major determinative factor of what the value or the meaning of the artifact is going to be. So if it's to do with suggesting where a future of text 25 is, then that artifact of London is different to if you were getting, a piece of information about a particular hilarious like street name, if they have any of those in London for any reason, that somebody was drawing attention to.
Absolutely, which is why it would probably make more sense to London temperature right now. One single variable that changes rather than London as a whole package. So what I like about the whole LaTeX BibTeX thing is that so-and-so equals so-and-so. I think that is just amazing. So I could so easily imagine, not make, but imagine copying, and the copy will include, if it was in a 3D space, what its parent was, if there is such a thing, what the volume was, right? Or how it relates to another thing. And all of these things we can discuss over nice coffee again and again, which is wonderful. I love doing that with you guys. But I think we're getting quite close to having an opinion, as Brandel says, about a few of them and just doing it. So, we have now Canvas JSON export because Fabien suggested it. Thank you, Fabien. So if we can now start trying to throw things back and forth and see how they connect, it may be useful to get some practical experience with this. What do you think? Are we there yet? Are we soon there yet? I mean, thank you, Mark. But just briefly, because I was actually going to mention you, I can imagine such a thing as we talked about. Everybody now has a copy of the book. It has all of this kind of goody stuff in it. And Mark has seen some interesting articles. So he in XR makes a view, makes some commentary in little boxes, and then he's able to copy that, so to speak, and give it to me, let's say. And I put it into that original book. So it knows that when I paste it into this place that it came from, then it knows what to refer to, and I can see what he's pointing to. So that's why it's good for the copied bit to have a volume. It's similar to my interest in subscribing to Mark Anderson's RSS feed for hypertext articles, because in this area he is an expert. So now essentially what we're talking about is entities as annotations, right? Kind of. Mark.
Well, it's an interesting thing you just mentioned, because I think that goes back to sort of Karl's question earlier, because actually when you said, somebody put some annotations on this and then I then put them in the book. So at that point, you are switching into almost an editorial mode, because you're taking a possible relationship and you're turning it into now a stored relationship, which on one level is a small thing. But I think it hints to something I've just seen in the sort of discussion today, that most of the things we're talking about are not really new. A database having a field and a value, which is just what that the BibTeX is essentially just a tiny little text-based database. So it's not like this much new here. I think the challenge part is what I sense is behind your question is you want a more human-friendly interface to these systems, because we've had all these sort of systems for a long time, and the reality is, apart from for the people who make them, most people find them difficult and unfriendly and too abstract. That's not a critique of the work that's been done. It's just partly cultural perspectives as much as anything, and your familiarity with that field. So I mean, I found it really interesting is when Adam Verne took the original citation database information I made, which I'd done as some node and edge tables, simply because I'd done it so I could do some stuff in Gephi, and that's what Gephi wanted. But when he said to me, "Well, couldn't you just do it as JSON?" and it wasn't that difficult to do, but once I made it, and then I realized, well, actually, yes, I'll stop worrying about the links. I'll just basically things will know the ID of the other things to which they have a relationship, and software can sort it out after that. And that was massively powerful. The reason I mention that is that's something that's not obvious to us when we're sort of authoring word writing mode, unless we're quite ingrained in this stuff, which I would say is a very small proportion of humanity. So most of us are trained to think and work in long form. We're talking about a manner of creating text that doesn't work well that way. because you actually have to think about all the moving parts and less about the linking conjunctions that you're using at the beginning of the end of your sentence and stuff. And nor am I suggesting the two should be disjoint. I hope they aren't. You know, you don't want everything too clunky and self-contained. But there are a number of errors, challenges there, most of which, to my mind, actually exist outside the technology. They're not technical problems. They're human learning / training issues in the way that we do things. So it's not even, I don't think it's even as simple as, you know, finding a better UI, because the UI can only show so much, but there's only so much heavy lift it can do in terms of bridging you through into an abstraction you don't understand. So there are two things to do here. One is to make use of much of the technology, which I think in a way already exists, and we can package it up in different ways. But I'm not sure there's any new particular technology we have to build to do this. It's partly figuring out a way in which we can make it usable to a much broader cross-section of society than is probably present in this room at the moment. And in a way that they can not only consume from it, but they can add to it. Sorry, somebody off. Apologies. As Rob. And I would claim I don't have particular answers in that. What is interesting is that, I mean, there's another project I'm involved in at the moment, but the moment you mention doing anything on the human side, it's just crickets in the room. And this isn't because they're all technologists. It's just, so it seems the humanists have no better idea how to do this.
So yes, and also on to Karl's point in the chat here. I'm just going to ask, what are we going to be looking at? What is our use case? I really think our use case should be writing an article for the next volume of our book, because that's a very specific and real thing, but it's also generalizable for anybody writing any kind of an article for any kind of a connected volume, right? But it means that we come in with it with our honest passions and our honest perspectives. We don't genericify it.
Unfortunately, Rob left already, but I was over at a mutual friend's house, an author now, actually fairly successfully published author. I started talking about books in VR before she'd managed to go to get her first book out, and she didn't think it was a good idea then. And now I'm actually responsible for that kind of thing, and she's got half a dozen books out. She was talking about her next book. She's a scientist, science communicator, and the next book is going to be illustrated for younger audiences, and she got to write it. She obviously she writes it, but she's gotten permission from her publisher to illustrate it as well, and so she has a dual responsibility and even more reason to be able to kind of understand and spatialize all of the things that the book is. It's going to be a Dead Tree book, but nevertheless, being able to kind of look out across all of the illustrations, where you're going to put the work and how the sort of the structure of it fits together. And so she literally had all the pages out on the ground in her sort of studio space the other day. And then only recently sort of put them all away. And I said, wouldn't it be convenient if she had the ability to just sort of keep them out digitally, or have only arranged them digitally, and so that she could kind of go back to that without having to do it. She was like, "This sounds terrible if I'm not going to be able to pick them up and feel them and things like that." And even as she's sort of developed this increasingly spatialized mode for being able to plan and consider what it is that the book is going to be, still sort of violently opposed to the idea that a digitization of that representation will provide any significant lift and benefit. And I think one of the big challenges is that the significant indexing on a non-digitized, non sort of respatializable representation of any information, be it stuff that you're authoring versus stuff that you're consuming, is a really significant challenge to how it makes sense to do that. And so the data representation is really secondary to what kinds of things it makes sense to do with that stuff, and for what purpose. The other thing about the book is that it has drifted a lot in terms of what it was that greenlit the deal with the publisher, and partly because of the leeway she has now, they've been able to kind of figure out what the book is versus what it started to be. And so only some of that, I mean, all of that is relevant to her and the publisher in terms of the the path is, but not all of that is relevant for what the document is that the conclusion of the effort will ultimately constitute. There are things that go into the construction history of a book that aren't fit for encoding in terms of people arguing about hating a title versus sort of committing to it and things like that. So I don't know, like I think that absent a model of what we can functionally achieve with a certain approach to it, a lot of the information about a lot of the conjecture about what it is we exchange feels sort of secondary to what we get from a document that is constituted from those things. If I had to try to take something out from what I just said. And yeah.
Oh, a lot of things. Oh, yeah, Leon, see you later. Good to see you today. First of all, in terms of the 2D representation of the book, maybe we need to think about EPUB again, because it's probably cheaper to do EPUB views than it might be just doing only straight XR, and we don't want Andrew to be overworked, obviously. So he will do a lot of experimenting, but it shouldn't be, hey, how about this level? So your question there, Mark, is really, really important. But just as a brief aside with the thinking, who of you have seen the Apple Vision Pro Submerged, the first kind of scripted 180 stereo?
You didn't do it this weekend. I promised to start, and we'll watch it soon.
Okay, so I'm going to give you spoilers. It's a short one, don't worry about the actual story. But the reason I'm mentioning it is technically, of course, it's amazing. But as a filmmaking thing, I think it fails on many, many levels because the notion of size of a human, when you're seeing stereo 180, is completely different from if it's framed. If it's framed, we understand wide shot, close up, and all of that. But when it's presented in front of you, there's one scene that's really dramatic and impressive. The main character is running down the submarine. He looks like a toy because he's small, right? There is the real impression that he is small now. In one of the establishing shots, you're behind his head and it's uncomfortably large. It's larger than if he was sitting in front of you, but it's also in your space. So I'm mentioning this because even with our kind of knowledge presentations, there are some human scale things when it's done at a really high quality. Because the great thing about Submerged and the other Apple ones is they're freaking amazing, right? So they're no longer just an idea of anything in this space. There is something in the space and we can experience it. So for all of you who have the headset, view it as soon as you can. If you don't, try to just anywhere else. Mark, come to London. Actually, I'm going to be in Southampton on Thursday. Maybe I see you then. Right. So the question that Mark asked up here about what would I want in a submission to the future of text that isn't normally there in normal writing, for instance, metadata, my basic thing would be maybe some glossary terms. However, I'll turn the question to all of you as authors and contributors. What kind of thing would you like to be able to add to your piece that'll have some meaning rather than just being quote unquote plain text or an image?
something we want to add that you said is not plain text or an image?
Yes, because those things can be done now. It could be that you want to define a few things and that it's understood by the system. It could also be something as sophisticated as code, which is somewhere else, but it is somewhere else in a way that in your piece can easily be brought forth and run.
So I I bought following Fabien's cue. I bought one of these meta pens, just so I can see what it's like and think about it and what I want to do with it. And one of the things, whether accurate or not, I was recommended by the Quest store was Shapes XR, which is a pretty cool little prototyping, well, not little, fairly substantial prototyping tool in terms of its scope, actually. They've done a lot of work, and it's pretty impressive. One of the things that the main canonical examples have is these voice notes. And you tap on them, and then a guy, head and shoulders and down to the elbows and waist, um, not super realistic, but the hardware is what it is, um, tells you about some stuff. And so he's gesturing. His hand performance is recorded. They've done some visims, be that, because there's a camera on his face, or because because they've managed to come up with a model based on the speech. I don't know. It doesn't especially matter. But what is really interesting is the fact that, he's recorded these things. It's obviously the author or near enough of these tutorial things. And so he's pointing them to you, pointing them out to you. So like you tap on this, and then you need to go down there, and it's really neat. It reminds me a lot of what the fellow Phil Levin did with if you've ever heard of, there was an app. It still is. It's still working. It's a popular thing, but probably slightly Sherlocked by some of the stuff that has happened with the Apple camera and stuff in the more recent years. But it's just this idea that your little avatar representation via camera in a COVID lockdown world of everybody just living in Zoom windows like this needs to have more expressive relationship and ability to relate to the content as it exists on your screen, so that people could integrate sort of medallions and move them around in order to make sure that they sort of perform those things. And so but I think that this Shapes XR representation is a better example of that than even of the version. The challenge is that it exists within an XR context that is much more opinionated about what it is that can be and what you can do. And so, he doesn't have large stretches of text in the same way that a web page can, or the ability to arbitrarily overlay stuff. But it's a really great start. So I would like to do that. I would like to be able to kind of point and move things around. And my this is the HTML model element is brushing close to that as a set of actions. I kind of implemented a scripting a keyframing sort of system to be able to kind of go between beats. And I would consider standing in those beats myself and kind of performing that as a next step to be able to kind of bridge that gap between the information and my presenting of that information.
That's pretty sophisticated, but we'll note it down. But yes, cool. Fabien, please.
Just briefly, well, first I invite other people to try the pen, buy it or not, but give it a go, because I think it's again it's weird how quickly we used to pens. That being said, I don't think it's as revolutionary, for example, as 6 degrees of freedom or anything like this. So it's just a controller with a different shape. But I think in terms of how precise we can do things, including like how we can draw on a physical surface to get data out in the sense of its shape, I do think it's interesting. And again, if it's just to think about it or how to design things, including 3D for non-professional modelers, Again, don't buy it or don't buy a quest just to try this. Find somebody around who has it, but I think it's going to unlock or potentially give some ideas at the very least. So I encourage it. Also briefly put in the chat, I know somebody at ShapeXR. I don't think he works specifically on like annotations or how to eventually enact them. But if people here believe it's interesting to have him and present, I'll happily invite him there. Two quick prototypes also that I've done, and I'll eventually put the link in the chat. One was using speech, also due to a bit of Brandel lobbying on how speech coming to the Vision Pro was a new possibility in WebXR. So I've done a quick demo where you say a thing like add a cube, and it would put a cube in front of you, apply color blue, and it would make that cube blue, etc., etc. I mean, not a lot of etc. Actually, a couple of functions like this, and including undo, so that if you don't want the cube, you can put it, remove it, or delete it. So a couple of useful things like this, and it was surprising in the sense of how basic it was, and yet being able to have both affordances of speech and being able to do hand tracking to move the things created was, in terms of design, okay, liberating is a bit much maybe, but still it felt quite efficient, and it's kind of I'm a bit ashamed to say this, but I don't have so many moments in XR where I'm like, wow, this is actually a new workflow that is efficient. It's quite often like, oh, it's awkward. So when I do find those, and I think being able to have voice and an input that is both familiar and precise, and coupled with voice again, so both annotation, like, oh, you add, you say, oh, that sphere is not round enough or whatever. I can't do it right now, but I'll do it in the future. And you keep on working both with the speech to do things and to annotate. Yeah, that's one of the latest prototype I started to work on last week, is speech and the pen as an input. And I think those affordances are quite interesting. I invite everybody to dig at it, because I think it's even powerful.
Thank you, Fabien. I'm surprised that Apple hasn't done this yet, the pencil thing. I mean, they do have Apple Pencils. I'm sure it may happen, I don't know. But the notion of having a tool in your hand that isn't a games controller is incredibly intriguing, especially something that has been developed over literally thousands of years. Because even though Andrew's worked really hard and done a great job with pointing, to have to shape your hand around nothing to get a gun gesture and do this, it's suboptimal. Hopefully we will have these kinds of tools that everybody can use. But I'm glad you reminded us. The speech thing, hang on, let's just have a look. Yeah, I mean, I really don't mind speech and multimedia. It's not all about hardcore text. For us to think about how to embed even snippets would be really, really cool of speech. Imagine you're clicking on, okay, that sounds exciting. Yeah. Oh yeah, you mean, did I say, is this the paper he presented in Poland?
Yeah, and I know it's 2D and stuff, but it's interesting. One of the interesting
I was there,
Yeah, but there's one. It's that thing of I listened to the presentation as well, and I'd had the advantage of, because I'd ported it into LaTeX for him, so I'd had a pre-read of it. But you get a sort of different take out of it when you actually do the close reading as opposed to the overview. What's interesting actually from the nice list you posted in the sidebar is I'm reminded of one other challenge here that relates to metadata, whether it's about sort of textual things or visual things, whatever, is that getting the sort of completion state in the environment, for want of a better word, that you're using can be incredibly hard. A lot of these ideas are really fabulous, but they're held back by the fact that normally you have a massively incomplete and inconsistent set of information to work from, which then makes the sort of all the nice visualization one's trying to do work really badly, because it doesn't it quite fairly assumes that actually the thing's going to be right. So there's another sort of building challenge for us here, is that I don't know how you get over that hump, and that was sort of what was nested in my question to you about, well, what do you want from authors? Because lots of people, again, probably not necessarily the ones in the room at the moment, will recoil at being asked for more information, either because they think it's intrusive or they just don't think it's relevant to writing a piece of work. And it's quite difficult to just say, well, no, but don't worry about that. Just give us the information, because that will make them. Normally, what happens is, like anyone, you become more suspicious, because why are you being asked for something you really don't think is necessary? So there's a genuine challenge, and I don't think our request for such things is wrong or unrealistic, because it's very pertinent to what we want to do in XR terms. But there is a challenge in getting to the point where we've got enough information that we can actually do something with it. Because if only one person gives us a really wonderful metadata, we can't do much with it.
Yeah. No, this paper is, I put a screenshot of an image of it in the chat here, and Mark Bernstein referred to the bits in between the background as grouting, which I think is a really lovely term for an information space, because there you can turn on to see connections if you want to. Fabien, did you mention 2 prototypes?
Yes. Well, the first one is I did not share it, but it's where I just draw in space with a pen, I mean. And the other is the speech, which is the one I linked in the chat. And I think that, again, the intersection of both, the speech with which is rough, let's say, very coarse, like you add a primitive, you change a color, etc., but still relatively fast, and you don't need to learn so much once you understand like primitive and apply modifier. And precision, which is either to same as speech, namely either adding a primitive, or if it doesn't fit in the vocabulary, the list of commands, adding an annotation. It's the same with a pen, like you can precisely grab an object and move it around, which is like millimeter precision in 6 degrees of freedom, or very roughly just like circle, like this edge of that cube should not be there. Again, I can't fix it right now, but I know it's wrong, so it's for the future self to take care of. Having those, like, again, I haven't done it yet. I have some code that kind of runs, but if I share it, nobody will actually understand the point. So I need to make it clear enough so that people can get it. But it's technically feasible today. And I think, again, the intersection of both, it's like fast enough that you can just think while doing the thing, and precise that even though right now, like I don't have, for example, being able to change the vertex itself or an edge or this kind of things, it's enough to understand that were it be there, you would be able to, and a non-professional, again, 3D artist or modeler would be able to change a 3D shape. I think it's, I mean, I'm excited by it, but sadly for this, I don't yet have a demo to share.
Just looking at, what is the Google Doc that was just posted here?
I believe it's Karl's.
Oh, okay, cool, thank you. It looked familiar. Good. So, as a practical thing for today, and yes, Fabien, I know to an extent we have it, what is the interest in the community to start testing a standard of, here's an entire volume as a canvas JSON in 3D, and also here's one or several entities selected in a thing, copied and given to someone else?
I mean, I'm obviously interested. I've put like, let's say if it's a little bit like somebody who maybe, let's say UK and France as an example, and they're building a railroad, each have their railroad system, and they put a tunnel under the ocean, and then the two lines, they're a little bit apart. They're both running trains and all, but they're a little bit off. So I think we're like, I put more part in France, let's say, with this part of the well-raised system. It's probably off. We probably have to adapt, etc. So like I'm ready. Please do connect. Try something. And again, I want to highlight that it is just the information there, the kind of interface, the affordances in space to manipulate are not there yet. And I do think I don't want to like misrepresent that it's like, oh, it's a trivial problem. I'm also not saying this. So that's also why I'm excited by this. It's like if there is another railway line, to keep on the metaphor, with somebody who is ready to consume, let's say, that information in space. Yeah, I'm ready to put quite a bit of work to adapt so that it's useful.
So that's wonderful. And just briefly on that. So we have a test version now, author to export, that you've been looking at. The next question would be to select one or more entities in the space, doing the equivalent of a control click, and then copy this. Could you send me an email about how you want that to be so I can tell my programmers to implement it so we can start testing? Because it would be kind of crazy to be able to send you a text message of this, and then you're in the space, you copy it, paste it into your environment, and it pastes as objects. So we do it the least high-tech possible to begin with, just to see that the objects can move around and maintain basicness.
In terms of implementation, the least amount of work for me is getting a JSON URL, like a working URL with JSON at the end, and then I can consume it easily. That's the easiest. And if that URL is sent with an SMS or chat message or whatever, doesn't really matter.
So I would have to use some kind of a nonsense server kind of thing?
Yes.
Why can't I just send you objects?
I mean, yes, you can send the whole file, and I can download it and upload it or put it on a server in the end. But yeah, if for you, I just say what's easier for me.
No. But
sending the file, then yes, I need the file.
But it's a dialogue. It's a bit of a back and forth. Because obviously I'm fighting my corner for what's easiest for me as well. So can you not? I like servers for distributing things, but I don't like them. I don't like to have my users specifically to have a server available to share stuff. Right?
Well,
but Fabien, if we have the equivalent of a BibTeX for a site, okay, let me ask you this then. Right now, it would be relatively easy for you, I hope, if you copy a BibTeX thing and paste it into your environment and have it appear as an object that knows that it's referring to a paper or a document, right?
So copy and paste on desktop is one thing. Copy and paste on a VR headset, as you know, is another. And I need still to get the file in the headset and then somehow open the file, which I guess if it's still, I don't even know how I would open the file in the headset. I'm not. Do we have file browser? Let's say on the Quest. So you see, it's.
So there isn't a mechanism when you're in WebXR to have something copied to the Quest or the Vision or whatever, and then do a paste operation. That is not something I was aware of, but of course that makes sense.
Like again, it's feasible, but I think actually for a normal user, it's not feasible. I think if you take a random person who just bought a Quest, they're not in developer mode or anything like this, you want to send them a file, like you can't assume that they have, let's say, their email saved on like as a client on the device. So I think files there are actually harder for like even a non-normal user, let's say a professional, but I think for a normal user, it's even hard. It's impractical, I want to say.
That's horrible. Okay, let me think about that. Karl, thank you for your patience.
Oh, I was gonna circle back to the mention of is there interest in exploring or poking at these things, and I will say yes, and I'm interested. I have sort of a passion for testing software, and I seem to have a knack for breaking anything that I put my hands on. But as a programmer, I usually tend to know why. something breaks and can usually tell you without looking at your code where to go to fix it or find it. So I will say I'm interested in testing new slices as they come out. I'm not sure that I can promise a consistent block of time or ability to give feedback just because of how many things I have my hands in right now. Potentially rewriting all of Andrea's game in a new engine, being one of them that's currently up in the air as far as whether that's going to take off or how much time it's going to take. But I would be interested in seeing the progress, and when I have time, putting my hands on it and giving feedback.
So, thank you. But just a little bit more on this point. So, I'm sitting here in my 2D author, got my map. These are a few things I want to send to Mark. Select, and then I have a control-click menu. An option there then needs to be paste to server or something like that for Mark to be able to easily put it in his world. I mean, if we have to have a server, we have to, and I see what you got here, Fabien. But let's say that it's become, just looking at what you wrote here, Chris. Yeah, no, Chris, that's really, really important. And if you want, do you want to maybe spend a few minutes on that next Monday to present your perspective on this? Because this is clearly your specialty.
Yeah, sure. It's it kind of cuts across all these issues, I think. There's a lot of it's, I don't know, it's hard to say. It's like it's boring and behind the scenes. It's not UI, but it's like it's so foundational that it seems like it's the essence of what is the identity of information, what is the mutability, semantics, all these things like can't be avoided at some level. I think just we can patch them over with different addressing schemes, arbitrary JSON, but if we have everything, if we have information siloed in different apps, different protocols, different file formats, I think it just seems like in my however many year history of in the field, it's a persistent problem that doesn't get solved, but also no easy answers. So
yeah, okay, let's start Monday with that. Thank you. That would be really, really good. What's this? Hang on. Oh, okay, thanks, Karl. Mark, what were you referring to Fabien there with demo? Do you have further things to demo, Fabien? That would be great.
Yeah, it's a quick note actually. Sorry, Mark, because I saw. Thanks. Because Karl mentioned rewriting the game from or the work from Andrea also, and it's something I tested just this morning. I tested last week and this morning. So I'll briefly share my screen. Please let me know if you can see anything.
It said start. Oh, yes, it works today.
It works today. So first, I'm super happy because I uploaded my video on my video server. I put it the timeline, like the little shortcuts, and it put the shortcuts visually on the timeline. First time I see this, I find it super cool.
Very good.
So I'm using, it's not me who's built it, it's called PureTube, and I recommend it, especially if you hate Google and YouTube like I do. But it's not what I want to show. It's so some of you might know Unity, most of you I guess, which is a game engine with an editor. And what we tried with Brian is Godot, which is an alternative to it. And what you can see maybe is it runs here straight in the headsets. I'll put in full screen. I'll move it in silence because it's in French, and I'll do an English version for it. But the engine with the editor runs in the headset, and you can also do live editing. So as in the short video in the middle, and what we're doing. So we will move part of the ground, let's say, and we won't even save it. We just move in the editor, and it's going to move in VR. So the editor is in VR. I'm not touching my desktop. He's doing everything with the controller, as you can see on the video. and yeah, changing color and etc. And I think, yeah, I find this pretty interesting and exciting. Like you can do proper game editing, and including if you have a Bluetooth keyboard, you can type your code in there. You're on the plane, works offline if you want to. And you can just build a 3D world. If you're not a programmer, there is also like drag and drops, there are plugins and all this. And yeah, it's fresh out of this morning. I'll put also a link to the Godot editor in the chat, but and it's all open source, so it's also potentially quite interesting in terms of building on top of it, and yeah, being able to do even more.
Okay, that's really brilliant, and thank you. Before you go, Fabien, just if you don't mind, language-wise, to go to what Chris was talking about. Imagine I'm in the situation, I've got a few things, select something, there's a pop-up menu, and now I want to make it available for Karl. These entities, right? That is what I want to do. Privacy doesn't really matter right now, but what is the thing it should say? Upload to server, share, shoot into space. What is a good language?
Shoot into space is obviously the most exciting one. So if I'll have to go in a few minutes, but if I was a marketing idiot, I will say the cloud. Sorry, I'm being I shouldn't say this, but I mean, that's what people use the cloud for. It's a server on somebody else's basement or in a data center or whatever. So, and it is useful. Like I also don't want to, it's just I have so many problems in terms of privacy and how it's been misused that, voila.
Okay,
but otherwise, like save to the cloud and then pull from the cloud, load from the cloud, and the cloud is basically my server in my basement or your server online, or we rent it.
Fabien, I'm cutting you off only because you don't have a lot of time. In Basecamp, when we have our agenda, there is create public link. That might be the analogy, right? Create a link so someone else can use it. Now, I'm not saying we have to define it now, but in terms of understanding each other's language, right?
Yes, yeah. I think saying public, for example, does avoid quite a few things in terms of we're prototyping. So I think it's okay also that the assumption of like if Karl tasted is going to assume like, oh, maybe the data is going to be deleted tomorrow morning because we messed up somehow. So it's not as if it was going to production tomorrow for millions of users. So I think that's safe, but yeah, we can say saving to public cloud, loading from public cloud. I think it's relatively safe, and I think it's also it
good.
Makes sense. It's coherent.
Right, good. So even if we don't do the whole map, you can select a specific amount of entities and do this. So we'll have to decide with your leadership, Fabien, what this JSON should look like, and then we'll start testing. And also before you go, Andrew, this whole notion of someone being in one environment and then shooting out a public link for a JSON with all these goodies about these entities, how would you like to receive them? Or is that not a question to be asked quite yet?
Yeah, I'm not sure yet because you can't fit all of the JSON that we need inside just a URL string. So we'd have to put the data elsewhere and then retrieve it, which is fine. And I'm still working on the JSON on my end. Every time I try to work on it, I get put on something else. So the JSON currently doesn't import on my end. So really, I have to build that first before I would know how to pass it through. But
talking of which, how are you getting along with the display of references on the side?
It's going along well, like making very consistent progress. It's complicated. There's a lot of pieces that move together. So I have a lot of individual pieces working, but they don't connect to one another yet, which is what I'm working on.
So we should probably define the next stage as the Argonauts. So it's going to be JSON and the Argonauts only, right? We have to have this connective thing.
Because I'm going soon, I can be more impolite than usual. Just to answer your question on behalf of Andrew, who can then correct me after I'm gone. It's what I would do is to have a URL as a load and save as default. It's not accessible to the user. It can be overwritten also as a URL parameter. So let's say if we're testing and somebody wants to load and save on their own testing server, they can do that. So it's like default URL. From the URL, it loads the JSON with everything. We don't have size limit, basically. And it can still be overwritten so that it's kind of federated. Like if people want to use whatever other server for that, they can do.
Right, but the question still becomes, I'm sending something to Karl. So select something on my screen, choose make public link or equivalent. That then creates a URL and stores JSON on a server that this link links to because of
But
the
this
size.
URL is, let's say, fabienbenetou.fr/saving. It's like it's a fixed URL, it doesn't save, and if you write on top of it, it deletes everything and puts the new data in. So that this fixed URL is the one that Andrew can use. It's hard coded, yes. My leadership is like I say it is how it is. And then if you want to do it differently and so on Frode server, you open the URL with as a parameter, so the URL of the WebXR page, and as a URL parameter, you can have a save load to cloud URL, which is frode.server/saving, and then you can do whatever you want there. So it's like by default, it's on my server. Optionally, it's wherever you want as a user.
Yes, no, that's fair enough. But let's say I want Karl to have this set of stuff. So I make a link for him and give it to him. But I want Mark Anderson to have something else from this space. So I select another thing and then I do. So these should be two separate URLs, right?
Yes.
Right. So then the final question, well, you're still here, Fabien, I promise. And that is, in what Andrew already has, to use Andrew's world as the other side prototype, how in the world does he receive this URL? How does he find it? How does it integrate?
Well, again, it's saved by default. He already has it. It's like fabien.benetou.fr.
No, but the first time, Andrew and I don't know each other. We have a chat. But, oh, this is such a cool set of things. You need it. How do I communicate that to his environment?
As a URL parameter of his WebXR page. Let's say andrew.com/WebXR for future of text, and then question mark, saving URL equal, and then the URL to that JSON. And then when you send it to him, it opens, and then he does whatever he wants.
So I have to know his URL to be able to send him something in this context.
No, you can just give him the parameter, like the URL with wherever you have saved something, and he would be able then to use it to his world or application or whatever.
So, Andrew, if I give you icloud.com/liquidizer/ here is really cool JSON stuff, how do you take that string and put it into an environment you already have?
I mean, assuming we're just going to pass over the part that it's in the right format, because that would be implied. Yeah, Fabien's just describing it. You just have the workspace URL, whatever we decide this VR space is going to be, slash, and then or hash or whatever. Just include the reference to your uploaded JSON somewhere, and that's all you need. Assuming that I can read it, because some servers don't give you access to that.
No, absolutely. Assuming it's the right data and you have access. But what if you're already in the workspace and you've got all kinds of stuff over there, and the stuff that I just sent you, you want to have it here. So it's not about opening up only a workspace that I'm sending you. It's about adding these entities into it.
I mean, that's just a design choice at that point. You'd have to decide if a new upload, a new JSON catalog would overwrite the current one or add on top of. Logically, it would overwrite. If you really hate that idea, you could have it be additive, I suppose, though with WebXR, it doesn't work well closing and reopening it. So as soon as you exit the WebXR space, if you go back into it, lots of issues start to happen with tracking. So really, you wouldn't be doing that.
Both you and Fabien are saying it in a much more intelligent way than the question. Please look at the chat. Karl wrote it in a much better way than I said.
So you just want to copy and paste text? You don't care about the connections or anything?
No, we care about I have a selection of 3 entities that I select. I create a magic pill that I make available online. And now I share it with all of you, let's say. You're in your headset, you have your environment, basically the library in our Sloan work is what I'm talking about. So you got stuff here, there, whatever. There needs to be a mechanism whereby you as the user can make your environment aware of this additional set of entities that are incoming. Give them a landing runway.
I'm saying you'd have to do that on load, right? I'm saying it won't work well with WebXR to have a space I've been working in, and then I'm like, I'm going to add some stuff to it. So I exit, I grab your link, and I open it back up again. Most cases that will break WebXR. Nothing I can do about that. And sometimes it'll be totally fine. So if you get lucky, it's okay.
So are you saying that basically you need to shut down the XR version, go back to the flat kind of loading screen for Sloan, and somewhere there you paste in the URL. So it now knows that when you go enter again, it takes whatever was there as a stored setup plus this new stuff in a box, so to speak, of new entities that you can then choose the position, right?
What you can do is while you're in XR, at least on the Quest, because it lets you keep the background while you open back up the browser tab. You can paste information in there, and as long as you don't click quit, you're still in the WebXR space. You can put information into the browser page and then resume, and it won't break. It's once you close the WebXR space and reopen it, that's when you start to get issues. So if you just stay in the browser window, you're okay.
So this is great, this is fantastic. So if I go into my thing, take these 3, copy the JSON that it has all the metadata about them, plus their relative position, I give it to you as Karl is asking, as a text message. You on your computer, copy that into your environment, just copy and paste into Quest or Vision. So when you're then in the environment, you quit out of it, but you're still in it, the page is still there, the spinning circle thing is there, but at the bottom of the screen, there is a please paste extra data if you want it to be added, hit enter, and then enter again, and it'll work, right?
No, but yes, you're on the right point. It wouldn't quite be those buttons. I don't think that's the point. And you can have that text or that upload extra information option only show up once you've entered the space for the first time, so you don't have cluttered. So that'd be kind of nice. It most likely wouldn't be a copy paste. It would probably be an upload JSON because that enforces it in the right format. But if you want to allow for copy and paste anything that could break the software, then we could do that too.
No, that's fine. So I believe what you're saying is you touch the thing to go out of XR mode. So now you're flat. The bottom of the screen is if you want to add entities to this, give us a legal JSON canvas link here, text entry box, and user paste in the URL that points to a blah, blah, blah.json. You then enter the environment again, and that is now in a inbox, so to speak. So so you obviously have a problem with if there's
you could do whatever you'd like with it at that point. Yeah, it would be in your space now, in whatever format you decide. And that shouldn't break because you've technically only paused the WebXR space, you haven't minimized it.
So when you then have it in there, and then you do save state, quit the whole thing, come back the next day, will it still be there? Can that be copied in at that stage?
Well, you told me to stop working on the save state, so I have no idea. In theory, yes, it would be fine if we build the save state to support that.
Okay.
Right now, the save state's based on the catalog, so it depends on what you pass into it. So if you're passing in external information now, that's no longer part of the catalog. It's now trying to reference things that aren't referenced, and that could break things. So we have to decide what information we're going to allow. If it's as far as just stacking catalogs, you're like, I've got this selection of documents that I'm looking at, and I'm now grabbing your documents that you've sent me in the link and what they have, and now I have two catalogs, we could combine that into one big catalog and then save that. That would work.
Okay, so this has been extremely useful. So I understand that on this side of the world, it's time to start getting the right Canvas JSON to you. So when you're ready to start working on that, please tell us. And then we will just test this to see if it works. It could be, it's not super elegant, but it's a real thing. Right, just to explain to an end user, if you want to share your entities with someone else, you got to generate a linky thing by clicking here, give it to them, and when you receive stuff, you got to take the linky thing and paste it in here. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's not Starship landing with its booster in the chopsticks, right? As we saw it this weekend. It is not that. So it's good. All right, Mark, you've been extremely patient. I'm so grateful for clarity on this, but Mark, please go ahead.
Well, I'll just reiterate my understanding. What I'm hearing at the moment is actually two discrete but connected problems. So I think the data passing one, I don't think anyone really does sense that we sort of know what to do. The problem is there is at the moment, whether generically in XR or by Murphy's Law, the tools that we happen to be using, there is a problem about getting the information essentially to appear live in the environment, because that's nestled in your original question. But I think we shouldn't try and do that, because all that's going to do is take us into obviously something that's a bit of a pain point in terms of maturity of the tools. What we can say is, well, we can imagine all the we can do all the rest of it. The only bit we can't do is live load it. And I know that's frustrating, but I think that's a sensible point to not try and push through and derail other stuff just to do it. Because I think it's something that will come as the tools get more mature. But I think the useful thing that's come out of the proofs discussion is, yeah, okay, if you want to take something in your environment and send it something else, probably sending it through the cloud, however you want to constrain or define that, does seem to be the technology at the moment to use. And that can be, as sort of everything matures, that can be well hidden from the user. So it doesn't have to be scary to a non-technical user. Essentially, they'll press the button and it will magically turn up in the next place. But obviously, as we've seen, there are a number of things to do, which makes me loop back to, well, one of the things I was thinking about is, yeah, so ideally you want sort of the URLs to be as short as they can be. So I would imagine it's better to have a shorter URL and let discovery happen when the URL is loaded, rather than passing a whole lot of parameters. Because again, another weakness of the general ecosystem at the moment is eventually you find yourself having to type a URL, and that's hellish if it's really long. The canvas file you've generated, that's nice, but I found myself thinking, so I opened up, okay, so it's a bit of JSON, but what do I do with it? So if I don't know what that is, so I was thinking one of the things you might want to do when you export a canvas file is you might want to export either a folder or a zip that is the canvas file and a minimal sort of proof of concept HTML page. In other words, so the person clicks it on their desktop or wherever, up will open a little map, and that takes some of the confusion away. In due course, again, once the ecosystem is linked up, the canvas can just travel on directly.
Absolutely. So in my own personal world right now, with Author having quite a few more downward, see you later, Andrew, and thank you, billions. Now that I have many more real users, I have to do another level of polish.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is the settings dialog. Oh my goodness, right? Like, all users are stupid, and that includes me. We don't have that much patience for things. So I completely agree with you, Mark. Right now, I think we need to focus on passing knowledge objects around that know about each other. Call it sculptures or whatever better language we will. After that, yes, some kind of an approach like visual meta that in the JSON at the top, maybe even in plain language, commented out and says, this is this, these are the parameters we've used. You can open it in these and these environments. Yes, absolutely no question that people coming at this from a point of ignorance should not feel stupid.
Yeah, but I mean, I literally probably just having a little HTML page that's exported with the JSON canvas, because if they double click that and it references the canvas file you've done, they'll see a nice picture, and that's really simple to do.
Adding another
minimal
file,
HTML is.
I'm not sure about adding another file, but this is definitely something to discuss.
Yeah. Okay. So going on, you mentioned bringing Canvas stuff into the environment. The one bit I didn't get, so is this an environment within the environment? In other words, so when we're
Yes.
okay,
Yes,
fine.
this is the big discussion.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're all running out of time now, but the notion of what is a volume. So in Vision OS, you have flat volume spaces, right? So we've got, and also it's a really big question, and that's why it was great today to in the last few minutes to be able to think of, here are three entities. I click a button, it's in the space. I send that address to somebody, and then those things come in. So they are sent to be in the new environment. So ideally, and what, by the way, Chris and Karl, have you both tried the Sloan software that's, that has already been built? Okay, please go to futuretextlab.info, click on current. It'll be up there. So as long as you're in a quest or whatever, you can try it. I will tell you no more. That means you're raw testers. So yeah, next week we will start with Chris setting questions and issues around what is this stuff. And yeah, I'm all very excited about this. You know, we are working on something important. Anything else for today?
You said that software is located where?
I will send you a link. 1 second. Oh, suddenly my computer wants all kinds of information. 1 second. Futuretextlab.info. I'll paste the link, but for some reason it's in a weird place. And then live XR experiences. So here's the link. On top of the page, on that page, is the current from Andrew and also Spaka from Fabien. The thing that is missing now is on the side of the document, you'll be able to spawn not only table of contents, which works, but also the document's references, which is what he's working on now, which is pretty damn cool.
So this is a desktop application, not something I open in my headset?
No, it's it. So you take that link into your Quest browser or whatever. So that's why I post everything on this page. So if you just say futuretextlab.info, all our new stuff will be available there. And also, if you have something you would like us to test, just tell me and I'll put it on that page as well. It's a quick and simple resource. So there we go. So thanks, guys. If you have any questions about what you may be writing, of course, you know, anytime, happy to talk. Let's hope we get it all done by Monday, which is unlikely, but we'll see what happens. All right, see you later. Oh, Mark, just really briefly, are you coming down on Thursday maybe, or up or west or whatever?
No. A, I've got a doctor's appointment here, and B, I'm actually going to be away from next Friday through the following Friday, so I also won't be able to make the next two meetups.
Okay. All right, fair enough. See you later, guys. Bye.